The explosion was strong. It sounded like a bomb had gone off, according to the store clerk. And when she looked up, she saw a little boy on fire in the parking lot. The bike that the boy had borrowed that day lay in the middle of the parking lot near the air machine. Its chain and the hose of the air compressor, both ripped apart. Nails and small pieces of metal peppered the parking lot and the westbound lane of Beggs Road. It was Christmas Day, 1984, in the little town of Lockhart, Florida. It was also the little boy's birthday. He was 11 years old. When the Orange County Sheriff's deputy arrived on scene at around 2:34 p.m., rescue personnel were already working on Paul Jewell. Crime scene images depict a dozen or so people around him as he lay on the ground, surrounded by first responders. Officer Donald Brannon, the first officer on the scene, noticed pieces of aluminum and bent nails all over the parking lot and the surrounding roadway. The front door and several front windows of the store were shattered and broken out. The rescue helicopter was dispatched at 2:34 and arrived on scene 8 minutes later. They had Paul loaded up and were departing the scene at 2:55. They arrived at Orlando Regional Medical Center at 2:59. It all happened really fast. Police taped off the area, and the first responding officer quickly began taking initial statements from witnesses. The store clerk and a customer said they were inside, heard a loud explosion, and when they turned to look out the window, what they saw was a huge orange fire billowing black smoke. They said it was about 6 to 8 feet high and 10 feet in diameter. And to their utter horror, they saw a little boy on fire. Immediately, the clerk called emergency services. A 21-year-old named Tony Pitty was on the scene before the officer arrived.
I was watching TV and I heard a loud boom and I ran outside, looked up, and seen the smoke. I began to run faster to the noise and I seen a little boy on fire.
And then they kept the boy on the ground, trying to hold on to him so he couldn't look at his injuries, trying to keep him calm until the paramedics arrived. He kept asking, "Am I hurt? Am I bleeding? Am I okay?"
I kept telling him he was all right.
And this was no small blast. It blew a chunk of cement from the base of that air pump that it was attached to. Bent metal fragments dented and punctured the east side of the air pump stand, and a nearby fuel pump had a ragged gash in its side. It's no wonder it didn't explode. And the bike that Paul had borrowed and rode to the store that day, metal fragments had broken the chain and punctured its tires and its rims. It even knocked a reflector off one of the pedals. The air machine itself sat at the corner of the parking lot, closest to where Beggs Road and Rose Avenue intersected. Yet the blast traveled across the lot to the store itself, in the other direction. The glass on the east door of the store was broken, and there were holes in the glass on the front of the store and the north side, and more holes in the bagged icebox on the opposite side of the parking lot from the air pump. Fragments believed to be from the bomb would be found across the street and in the gutter of a house in a nearby subdivision. A piece of pipe would be found by the Baptist church, which is across the street and a little ways down the road. Pieces of the timeline began to unfold as the officer continued to speak with witnesses who had been at the store that afternoon. Several witnesses said that they had been at the shop and go between 12:30 and 1 and did not see any type of package tied around the post of the air compressor. One of these witnesses was a 31-year-old male named David Beeler, who lived a few houses down on Rose Avenue. When he was asked to give a formal statement later that day around 6:30, his report reads like this. At approximately 12:30, I stopped at the air pump at the Shop and Go on the corner of Beggs and Rose Avenue. I used the pump to put air in my tires on a 1975 Ford Fairlane, gray and white. At that time, there was no package attached to or near the pump. At the pump was also a 1967 to 1972 white Chevrolet with a dark vinyl top. A white male, around 5'10", with dark, medium-length hair in his 20s, wearing a t-shirt and jeans, walked out of the store toward the vehicle, waiting for me to finish using the hose. I handed him the air hose and he didn't say anything. He started to put air in his right front tire and I drove off. Another man said that he and his son came to the Shop and Go to put air in their bike tires, but when they got to the pump, they noticed a shopping bag with a cardboard box inside. A piece of fishing line ran from the top of the cardboard box to the post of the air compressor and was tied around the middle of the post. This witness said that he thought it was some kind of hoax, so he didn't touch the box or the air machine. They left. When they drove back past the store around 45 minutes later, and they saw all the fire trucks and the police, this man stopped and he spoke with a deputy about what he had seen. His report reads in part, quote, "I saw a shopping bag with a cardboard box in it. A piece of fishing line was attached to the air compressor stand. I didn't move it. I told my son that someone was playing games, and don't touch it." This sighting of the unexploded device occurred at approximately 2 p.m., about a half hour before it detonated. To their credit, these witnesses were able to give a really detailed description of the brown cardboard box placed inside a tan-colored shopping bag that had 2 carrying handles, like a gift bag. The bag had dark brown stripes running up and down, approximately 1 to 1.5 inches in width, and there was a bow, a printed bow, in the center of the bag that interrupted the stripes. In the hours and the days to follow, technicians collected fragments from the crime scene and they tucked them into somewhere around 300 little yellow envelopes. The idea was to rebuild the device as best they could, so all the evidence would be flown to an FBI lab in Washington, D.C., where they hoped to get an idea about the perpetrator from the bomb itself. They'd eventually identify several brand names on parts used in the device, in an effort to ascertain where those parts might have been purchased. Now, one of the very first problems that would occur in this case, which was unavoidable, was that the helicopter that removed Paul from the scene displaced a lot of evidence when it landed. Tiny items blew out further, some so small it made it difficult to detect. In an article dated just 4 days after the incident, police said that the bomb was more sophisticated than they had originally assumed. And while all this was happening, the entire country was learning about this. Well wishes came from all over. Days after the bombing, customers who stopped at the shop and go stuffed dollars and coins, whatever they had to spare, into a gallon pickle jar. A makeshift sign written on plywood was propped up in front of Hilltop Trailer Park where Paul lived. It read, "Taking donations for little Paul." It was made and put up by a young friend of his. She told the Florida Today paper, "Paul would peek into everybody's windows at the trailer park and they thought he was just a nosy little kid. But he wasn't. He just wanted to watch TV because he doesn't have one." That's what she was taking donations for, to buy him a TV. Kay Theodore, a cashier at the Shop and Go, said, "Paul and his friends were always in here arguing over their 10-cent purchases. I'd tell them, 'Go on now, get your purchase.' I'd just said that to him about an hour before the bombing."
Right. Yeah, he come in with his bottle. He wanted a soda, and I'm thinking to myself at the time, I can remember that. A young kid coming out to get a soda.
So he came in earlier that day, and you wait on him that day?
He came in in the morning, because it was Christmas morning. He lived down the road from us. He come in to get a soda.
That means he had come back later in the day to fill up his air and his tires.
Right.
He had borrowed that
bike.
bike.
He had to have come back after I left. Either he had bottles to return or he didn't have enough money. It was in that line. It was one of our regular little customers.
There was an article that said that he had been up that day to return some soda bottles.
Yeah, he had been up there, and it was something to do with bottles.
Yeah.
And he wanted a soda. That I do know. And I left the store, I don't know, like 1, 2 o'clock, and I went home, and I was having dinner at the house, and my assistant manager called and said that the gas pump had blown up, and I said, "What?" Well, she said there was an explosion.
In the days after the bombing, his medical team gave Paul a 50-50 chance of survival. He was listed as critical but stable. The news was bleak, particularly for a little boy with his whole life ahead of him. Early on, doctors knew it was likely that his right leg would have to be amputated. After the first emergency operation, his limb was held together by a metal device attached to what was left of his leg during an 8-hour emergency surgery. Paul's prognosis would be better, they said, without the damaged limb and the extra possibility of infection. He had lost about 8 inches of shin bone and a lot of muscle during the explosion. And that was just his leg. The child also had 2nd and 3rd degree burns over half of his body. He was in good hands at the Shriners Hospital, where he was sent after his initial stay at Orlando Regional Medical Center. Shriners would pay all of his medical costs, including transportation to and from, until he was 18, but I doubt that was much comfort to an 11-year-old in severe pain, away from home, and severely traumatized from what he'd been through. While Paul embarked upon what would be a long period of recuperation, police were tracking down as many people as they could who were at the scene that day. So before I get to some of the witnesses whose statements tend to corroborate one another or add to the timeline, I want to discuss a tip that probably got more news coverage than it should have, and how I think it could have derailed this case.
So at the time, I was a general assignment reporter for the Sentinel, and myself and another reporter, Alex Beasley, they asked, we started digging into it, and people thought that, that there was a long-haired guy that was there and might have done that. No one ever found that guy. I remember we got an artist's rendering based on a number of people who claimed to have seen that, and I remember taking it over to his mom and his uncle, and the uncle said, "Yeah, I've seen this guy before," but nobody could put a name to him or where they saw him or where he lived or anything like that.
I wanted to ask you about that sketch because it seemed, just based on my reading, that the police had a visceral reaction to that sketch, and
they were not happy with it. No.
Yeah, that's putting it nicely. Yeah, and I think just going through the documents now, is probably because that description doesn't match any of the physical descriptions of the people that saw people of interest on the day in question. That description was based. Can you take me back and tell me? I believe that was based on, at least in part, on a description given by one or two children. Is that correct?
At the point that we were talking to a lot of people, the police we were kind of surprised, as I recall, and again, this is how many years ago now,
right?
That the police hadn't canvassed, the sheriff's office hadn't canvassed everybody, in the area, and we ended up knocking on every door there was, and so, that picture or that drawing was based on a number of descriptions that we got of people. People provided from us, and was it just kids? I think it would have been more than just kids. We wouldn't have done it, but if it was just based on one or two kids. But I do remember canvassing the whole neighborhood, and people said, "No, I haven't talked to him," or nobody's talked to me about this.
Right. Yeah.
So I've got some handwritten notes from the investigator on these particular witnesses. First, the child was an 8-year-old third grader. Police went back to question her and her mother and her brother after the Orlando Sentinel published that sketch. According to the investigative notes, the unknown male subject was seen walking up and down the road. He had no vehicle, and he had a long beard, and his hair was pulled back, and he was dressed, quote, like a transient. This man was allegedly carrying a box with a hole in it. And the notes say that they saw this unknown man walking around outside the store, but they never put him in the area of the air pump. The notes also say that when they attempted to pin the kids down on details, they would become vague and give general information. The notes go on to say that the mother could be of no help, and the feeling was that the child's story was unreliable because she and the boy hesitated when giving details. Also, remember that everything that they say they saw occurred the day before the actual explosion, not on Christmas Day, and these two children weren't even in the area on Christmas Day. They had gone to their father's that morning. When one of the detectives went to an area where the boy had said he had seen the unknown suspect, it was behind a hedge, and the detective couldn't even see vehicles from there. In the end, I'm not sure that police put much credibility into this story. Not only did it allegedly occur the day before, but the physical description of the male was not the same as the description that other witnesses who were at the Shop and Go were giving of individuals that they had seen on the day in question during the relevant time period. In another article, a woman told the Orlando Sentinel reporter that deputies had told her they were looking for a man with dark hair, long sideburns, and wearing dirty clothing. Captain Gempel confirmed that they were looking for someone roughly matching that description. There was a sketch made, dated in February of 1985, that was a headshot of a man, a side view, with long sideburns and shorter collar-length hair. He did not have a beard. While this sketch does not match the one made based on the details from the young girl, police were careful not to rule her account out entirely. In another Orlando Sentinel article, Captain Gempel elaborated. Last week, the woman told the Orlando Sentinel that they saw a box attached to an air pump at the store between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m. on December 24th, the day before Paul was hurt. Gempel said the box that the two women reported seeing was similar to a box that a child saw a man place against the machine at about 7:15 that day. The type of box that the two women and the child say that they saw does not fit the physical size and description of the package that the other witnesses and Paul saw before it exploded. The captain conceded that it was possible that the man removed the first package and returned on Christmas Day with another one, but it would be a very dangerous, stupid thing to do to move such an explosive around. From what Paul said, the bomb was touched off when he touched it, Gempel said. Pipe bombs are more dangerous than other types because of fragmentation. Bomb experts do not attempt to dismantle pipe bombs because these devices are so unstable. They can easily explode, even in the process of making them. They are very unpredictable. During this time, police were making a concerted effort to warn the public about police sketches and composite drawings. They told the Orlando Sentinel reporters that they had 3 or 4 composites of persons and vehicles that witnesses saw around the shop and go store, but they would not make them public because the witnesses could not all agree on one composite drawing. Police were particularly critical of the sketch the Orlando Sentinel ran based on the child's descriptions. They noted that based on her own account, she never saw the man's face. Those details were added by the artist.
The only thing everybody agreed on was that Paul was not the intended target.
Right.
At least, that he just happened to be the wrong place at the wrong time.
Law enforcement said they simply had no information to lead them in any direction, other than they did not believe the bomb was intended for Paul Jewell. Police had very little to work with, other than the remnants of the bomb itself and witnesses. So putting together a timeline and following up on people and vehicles that were seen at the shop and go that day was important. I was able to put together a short timeline based on the documents that I received from the police and the people that I spoke with. Between 12 noon and 1 p.m., a woman named Linda Forrestberg was at the store, but she didn't see anything at the pump. A man named David Beeler used the air pump around 12:30, and then when he was done, handed it off to another guy in his 20s before he drove off in his 1957 gray and white Ford Fairlane. There was still no package at the pump at this time. Around the same time, a man named Alan Montez de Oca was going to put air in his tires, but he saw Beeler at the pump in his Ford Fairlane and then another guy waiting in line, so he passed and he thought he'd come back later. Around 12:45 or 1 o'clock, a man named Glenn Watson, driving his 1940 white Chevy pickup, used the machine and he didn't see anything either. And then it appears that sometime between 1:30 and 3, he's not sure, Mr. Montez de Oca returned to use the machine that had been in use when he drove by the first time. At around 1:30 or 2, another witness stopped and said that the store was crowded around that time, and around 2 p.m., Ted Quisenberry was in the area and he said he didn't notice a package either. Diane Turner was driving a 1978 maroon Granada, and she said that she was there around 2:15 or 2:30, but she saw nothing at the pump. This time period would put her there right around the time that the bomb was placed, and she did participate in helping to draw a sketch of a vehicle that she saw in the area at the time. A white two-door that was not in good condition. It had rust around the bottom of the door and wheel wells, and it had no hubcaps, at least on the side depicted in the sketch. And the back end was lower, meaning that the space between the wheel well and tire was tighter on the back than in the front. I think we can safely assume that this is not the car that Larry saw parked across the street, because he described it as a nice vehicle, and that's another reason that it caught his eye. The rough sketch with details on the white car says, if I'm reading it correctly, that it was a Nova. That sketch is dated February 27, 1985. But a Nova was not the vehicle that police were looking for 8 months later, when in October of 1985, the investigator on the case sent around an interoffice memo that stated, in part, "We are currently attempting to identify a vehicle and a person witnessed at the air pump prior to the explosion. We believe this vehicle to be a 1975 Pontiac Le Mans, white, gray, or light blue in color." Somewhere around 2 o'clock, Marvin Leninger and his son stopped at the air pump. They're the ones that saw the package, thought it was some kind of hoax, and they left. When they came back by about 45 minutes later, they saw all the emergency vehicles. That means that by sometime around 2 o'clock, the package was there. According to his statement, Larry Gosnell thought he was there around 1:45, but I suspect that there's a possibility he was there a little bit later. And when you hear his story, you'll understand why.
Hi, I'm Larry Gosnell, and I was about 19 years old. Me and my ex, we were going it was Christmas Day, and we were going over some relatives just right down the road, and we were actually, we borrowed my mother's Dodge van, and it was nipply that day. It was kind of cold, so as we were cruising down the road on Edgewater Drive, just back then they had a four-way stop sign. It wasn't a traffic signal light, so it was a four-way stop sign.
Right.
We were leaving east, headed west, and we're probably a couple cars behind at the four-way. And as people are moving up and going through the intersection, I was looking around, and I seen this fella coiling up a hose on the air pump that was right there at the corner part of the store to my left as I was coming up to the stop sign. And I thought to myself, nobody ever coils that up real nice.
Right, yeah.
It kind of looked odd to me, just to that aspect. And then he walked across the street to a car that's parked across the street from the store. It was a blue Falcon, a baby blue Falcon. And I thought, well, that was a nice looking vehicle, and wonder why he parked over there. So as we're moving up again, I realized these two little boys pulled up to the air pump with their bicycles. A little African American kid, and he started walking up to the store, and the other youngin went over towards the air pump, and I watched him as I went through the four-way stop sign. I watched him approach basically out of the peripheral by then of my eye. I could see the kid, going up to the pump as I went on through, with my own business. And about 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, we heard a boom.
Oh, my God.
And I turned to my ex, at the time, my wife, and I said, I said, was that a tire? So she looked out the mirror, we looked at see, well, the truck wasn't limping or anything, so we just kind of kept going, did our business, went and had our little Christmas party, and on the way back, we had passed through, and it was devastated. It was like a mess, because a helicopter landed there, just scattered all the debris, so it was like, what the heck happened here,
Right.
It just happened right behind us. I mean, we're talking 2 seconds, and we would have been in the blast itself. The police come over and picked me up from where I was living and asked if they would ride with me and point out exactly what happened. So we drove from where I was living at College Park over to the area, and I told them exactly everything I just told them. They said, thank you very much. And I said, well, you don't need to hypnotize. Nope. He says, you gave such a detailed account that we've already, talked to other people, and other people are saying all these same things.
Do you remember the vehicle that the guy was driving that was parked on that opposite wooded side of the road? Do you remember that vehicle? Anything about it at all?
Yeah, well, that was the thing. That's why I noticed it was kind of odd, because this was kind of like and I want to say a baby blue Ford Falcon, like a 69, 67. Could have been a Comet, but it looked like an older vehicles. It wasn't, and it was pretty. I was kind of noticed it, and it was parked over there on the wooded area side. I thought, well, maybe the old man's got a flat tire, but he pulled over. I don't know. Maybe he just pulled over to see if the pump was. I don't know what he was doing.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense. You're right, because if he's parked over there,
so
yeah.
I was like, okay, but as we drove past him on the right hand side, and her at the store. And I guess he must have drove off or something, or he was right there nearby the blast himself.
Okay.
Because what they told me is that he didn't have nothing to do with it. He told them everything I told him.
You assumed that the two boys were together, the little African American boy and then the little white boy. They were
down there with each each other, and then I guess the little white boy had to have his tire, needed some air for his tire, or maybe he noticed something different about the air pump. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know if the other little boy made it into the store, but I know when the blast hit, it blew out the store windows and everything.
He was moving through a four-way stop when he saw what he saw. A couple kids in the parking lot, at least one of them headed to the pump, and what he thought was a man coiling the air pump hose and replacing it, and then walking across the street to what he assumed was his vehicle, a powder blue Ford Falcon or Comet, 1967 or 69, in good condition. And he said that he heard the explosion as he was moving down the road. What stands out to me is that if the man had placed the bomb right before he walked back across the street, I can't see him coiling the hose. That fishing line was attached to the hose, so any movement of it after the bomb had been placed would detonate the device. And we know that because that's what occurred with Paul.
Paul grabbing the hose is what triggered it, supposedly. And what they found inside the bomb was not just your average pipe bomb, but I don't think it was that sophisticated. Just pipe and end caps, and there's some, I think there was powder in it, but it had a whole bunch of nails. They said that the person that put that bomb together definitely was trying to harm people because of all the nails and the metal that were put inside it that were sent flying, and they were all bent and everything.
That's a mean one.
Yeah, so
That's a mean one right there.
Yeah.
That's just,
we're talking about Christmas Day, a day when people kind of generally know where everyone is, like where your family members are. You'd think that for someone who had family or a kid who was expected at Christmas dinner or whatever, someone's absence on that day would kind of stick out, unless we're talking like, the loner type who doesn't have anyone. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You would think if you're having family dinners and those sorts of things, if one's absent from the table, it would be a noticeable absence. But again, anything is possible. I mean, this is so open-ended because you have so little to go on. I mean, you have fragments of a device.
And the witness statements don't get any better because they can't even agree on a composite. It's the whole case. I understand why it's where it is, because they just didn't have anything to go on. They really didn't.
If the store's your target, this device was just simply not adequate to create the kind of damage that you would want to either dismiss the store or shut it down or harm people even within the store.
Tell me what a pipe bomb is and how it generally works.
Well, a pipe bomb generally is a pretty, primitive, you could say, design. It's fairly simple to construct. It doesn't take a lot of intelligence to make it work. Typically, you'll see a segment of pipe. It can range really any length. It depends on the preference of or what they're trying to accomplish. Usually a steel device that tends to help with the pressurization that's needed in order to get the maximum effect from whatever explosive that you're using.
The FBI did an analysis of the items sent in that were found scattered around the shop-and-go scene, as well as chemical and microscopic analyses. They also did latent fingerprint examinations. In their findings, they described the bomb as an improvised explosive device, or IED, which consisted essentially of a length of pipe nipple enclosed at each end by pipe end caps, and double base smokeless powder as the explosive main charge. They believed that a piece of damaged battery fragment indicated that it had an electrical fusing system. That, in addition to the monofilament line, noted not only by witnesses but taped to a piece of the box found at the scene, led them to the conclusion that the device was constructed to function as an anti-disturbance device, meaning the release or application of pressure to a component in the electrical fusing system would complete the electrical circuit and initiate the bomb. In the pipe threads of one of the metal fragments found at the scene was a partially consumed particle of double-base smokeless powder. On a piece of cardboard, they found gray-colored smudges, which revealed the presence of zinc. Damage to the submitted bomb components, such as pipe and nails, indicated that the smokeless powder explosive main charge may have been initiated by a blasting cap or similar detonator. They also noted a variety of nails, most of them with explosive damage to them, some only fragments, and they indicated that they were employed in the device to cause injury and or death to the individuals in close proximity to the bomb when it exploded. They found blood and skin tissue adhered to some of these nail fragments.
When you take a double base smokeless powder, and you marry that with another circumstance such as a particular containment or a particular type of triggering device. So that's kind of what struck me. It doesn't look like, and correct me if I'm wrong from what I'm looking at here, they weren't able to recover most of or all of the container. They just have a segment of it.
Right.
And according to lab analysis, they say it was at least 8 inches long.
Mm-hmm.
And they're calling it a nipple, which is a part of the pipe that'll have threads on each end so you can cap it.
Okay.
Again, not uncommon for a pipe bomb device. But, assuming that this pipe bomb device is 8 inches or in that neighborhood, what strikes me about that is because in my experience on the job, I've personally not encountered a pipe bomb that short. They're usually a foot or more in length, and that's just the common way people do it. So what's interesting about that is when you take the double base powder and you introduce it to that small of a container, that's essentially what you need to do to make that double base powder act, to be able to act as a high order explosive.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's what struck me about it. I mean, we don't have enough information to say that's what was done, but if we're, keeping an open mind, we're being objective in the investigation, what you have is what you have, and you have to make your assumptions based on what you're looking at. So,
right. Well, that's interesting. Now, if I'm picking up what you're laying down here for me, is that we don't know if that was inadvertent or advertent, basically, whether the person was smart enough to know that or not.
Yes, that's the point that I'm driving at.
Gotcha.
Is, what that does also too is if you are, I guess for lack of a better term, a skilled bomb maker, you understand that if you're going to conceal your device, that you need to ensure that you have proper velocity. If what you're trying to do is maim people and you're trying to do that by filling the air with projectiles, you need to ensure that you have the proper velocity where that your projectiles are going to be able to penetrate your concealing device and be able to maintain the velocity needed to be effective.
Right.
What it was Christmas.
Uh-huh.
And that we were going over to my father's house. Okay? Mm-hmm. And I distinctly remember when I pulled up to that intersection, something hanging from the air hose.
Okay.
Okay? And I also distinctly remember a car being very close to park there. Right. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So, didn't think anything about it. Went to my dad's house and we had a great Christmas and so on and so forth. And then when we came home later that night, of course there was police all over the place.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And really didn't know what happened either at that time until the next morning or maybe even the morning after that. And they were basically looking for witnesses, and I just said, you know what, I saw something, I'm going to come forward. During that interview, they asked me if it would be okay to hypnotize me.
Oh, wow.
And I said, yes, it would be fine.
Mm-hmm.
And the two main things that I told them was I distinctly remember seeing a bag hooked around the air pump, and the other thing was a car. So they dove into, according to them, deeper into what kind of bag did I see. And you remember the old, I don't know if they still have them, but the 2-looped Christmas bags you would get to carry your presents in around the mall?
Right.
That's what it was. And then the car, I described something like a Chevy Nova with the slope back.
Did you remember what color it was?
It was blue.
A blue Chevy Nova.
It was a light blue color.
And you didn't see a person that you described, just the car?
No. I saw the bag, and like I said, I remember that car. It was kind of weird where it was. It wasn't parked like in front of the store, like somebody was going to go in the store.
Where was it parked?
It was parked like several feet away from where the air pump was, and it was facing the school. 10, 20 yards away from that pump, maybe something like that.
When we spoke, I asked him if he had participated in any suspect or vehicle sketches, because his initials were on a couple of them. He didn't remember that. I thought perhaps that the sketches were done from the details and information he gave while under hypnosis. He said himself that he vaguely recalled being asked to draw a car. Two of the sketches with his initials included a person. One was a man from a side view, a headshot, and he had long sideburns and collar-length hair. And the other was the man at the back of a vehicle, apparently doing something related to the trunk of the car, perhaps removing something from inside. The back view of the male in the sketch shows him to be wearing pants or jeans and a jacket of some kind. It also shows the back part of the vehicle and a sticker that was in one of the windows, actually on the driver's side near the rear, and it was about 3 inches by 3 inches. It had dark blue and gold coloring. Now this witness, his full name is actually signed at the bottom of a very detailed sketch of the bag that he saw hanging at the air pump. And this is something I didn't even notice until after I spoke with him, but it accurately represents the images I have within the FBI pictures of the bag that police believe was used to put the box containing the device inside. This man said that he thought it was a Jordan Marsh holiday bag, but from the investigator's notes, the bag may have come from a store named Jacobson's.
But yeah, ever since that happened, I always wondered what happened,
Yeah.
and because like I said, if you saw the kid like the next year or whatever it was in the Christmas parade, I mean, my heart broke. I mean, my God, it was just like, gosh darn, who would do that?
In 2008, Paul Jewell told Orlando Sentinel writer Jim Lustner about one of his most common nightmares: being near a gas station air pump when a huge snake, like an anaconda, attacks, looming over him and then biting his face. And then he'll wake up. Much like the snake, questions are still a looming presence over this case. There were a couple of themes that I heard about this case over and over. One involved biker activity in Lockhart in the 1970s and 1980s. The possibility that the bombing was drug-related or retaliation in that regard. But you have to ask yourselves, in what scenario involving the facts as we know them, does biker gang involvement make any sense? Yes, there were absolutely biker gangs in the Lockhart and Orlando area at the time. I'm pretty sure there still is. But does that relate to this convenience store bombing? I got no indication when speaking to multiple store employees that any of them had any running issues with any biker gangs. Now, the ATF is the agency that has investigated a lot of the local crimes suspected of biker gang involvement, and they had a role in the shop-and-go bombing as well. So, on Paul Jewell's case, there was an investigation brought before the grand jury, which was headed by agents of the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, who had initially said that they would share their findings with the Orange County Sheriff's Office and the State Fire Marshal if they found anything concrete on the shop-and-go bombing. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like they ever did. If I knew something, I would have told them 2 years ago. I would have turned my own mother in for blowing up a kid. This was a quote from John Kirk, a 48-year-old cabinet maker in Lockhart, who was one of 3 people summoned multiple times in front of a grand jury over a course of 18 months in 1986 and 1987. In that same article, I found what amounted to the only information that the Sheriff's Department ever released on the matter. Sheriff's detectives decided that Jewell was not the intended victim. They said he was hurt by a random act of violence and should not fear another attack. The detectives also learned from their interviews that a man with dark, unkempt, medium-length hair had been loitering near the pump on Christmas Day. He was wearing dirty clothes and had several days' growth of a beard. Over the years, around Christmas time and the anniversary of the bombing, local newspapers often circled back to the tragedy to update their readers. In 2003, the Orlando Sentinel contacted Mike Hedgerfield, who was then still the head of Orlando's ATF division office. He said his office, quote,
conducted an exhaustive inquiry that failed to find a suspect or a motive.
In an interoffice memo dated October 9, 1985, almost a year after the murder, Detective Lou Ronca requested assistance up the chain of command to get the word out about a vehicle that they were looking for.
We are currently attempting to identify a vehicle and a person witnessed at the air pump area prior to the explosion. Attached, you will find an artist rendering of a portion of the vehicle depicted by the witness. We believe this vehicle to be a 1975 Pontiac Le Mans, white, gray, or light blue in color.
It does appear that almost a year after the murder, this vehicle and the suspect depicted in the sketch were thought to be the person and vehicle of interest. Larry Gosnell saw a baby blue Falcon or Comet in good condition.
I seen this fella coiling up a hose on the air pump that was right there at the corner part of the store to my left as I was coming up to the stop sign. And I thought to myself, nobody ever coils that up real nice, you know.
Right, yeah.
It kind of looked odd to me, you know, I mean, just in that aspect. And then he walked across the street to a car that's parked across the street from the store. It was a blue Falcon, a baby blue Falcon. And I thought, well, that was a nice looking vehicle, and wonder why he parked over there.
Our hypnotized witness thought he saw a light blue vehicle like a Chevy Nova.
Something like a Chevy Nova with the slope back.
Did you remember what color it was?
It was blue.
A blue Chevy
It was a
Nova.
light blue color. It was kind of weird where it was. You know, it wasn't parked like in front of the store like somebody was going to go in the store.
Now, another couple of the important clues that police had came from the bomb remnants at the scene. The pipe bomb had been contained inside a cardboard box that was put inside a paper holiday shopping bag. They had pieced together the remnants of the box, and they found the words fragile, handle with care, and lamplight. Then the FBI removed tape from the pieces of the destroyed box, and they were able to reveal the following: dining with, and then the letters L.A., and division of, and then the letters L.A. Both of those with the L.A. were only a partial word. They felt that those words could have been dining with lamplights, and they may have thought something like division of lamplight or lamplighters or lamplights incorporated, something like that, given the next bit of information. In their files, the FBI found a manufacturer of lamplights and lighting fixtures called Lamplighters Corporation. It was a company out of Baltimore, Maryland. So basically, they believed that they had a brown cardboard box that had originally contained some type of lamplights, and that the box was then used to house the explosive device. I found the following in Detective Lou Ronca's handwritten notes.
I was watching Channel 6 News, the Mystery Diner, and they showed the White Marlin restaurant at Longwood Village Shopping Center. On the table were the same kind of lamplights that the box came from. Considering we found the bag at Jacobson's next door, there is the possibility that the perpetrator worked at or frequented the area of Longwood Shopping Village.
He then appears to have contacted the restaurant, the White Marlin, and asked them where they had purchased the lamplights. It was a store called The Brighter Side. But there's a little notation next to it that says no record of sales, so it doesn't sound like that particular lead was productive. There's no other information about these lamplights or if they were ever able to track down any other places that sold them in the area. All we know is that it appears that the perpetrator used a box that had once contained these lamplights. Now, these are the kind that sit on a table in a restaurant, so that gives you an idea of the kind of lights that they were. They're not hanging. They sit on a table, and they have to be short enough so that people who are sitting across the table from each other can see over them, hence the name, Dining with Lamplights. We can't know for sure if the perpetrator was the person who purchased the lamplights and then he recycled the box in his bomb-making endeavor, but I will say this. I've never owned any type of lamp that I put on my dining room table, have you? I've seen them in restaurants. And out of all the information that I read in this case file, or at least what I received, I think that's the one piece of information that was so specific, police might have gotten some traction from it if they had released that to the public in the early days of this investigation. I doubt very seriously lamplights for dining room tables were all that popular with people in the Lockhart community or even the surrounding areas. That might have just been something that if they had released on the news, a viewer might have picked up on something. And now let's talk about that box for a minute. It's a brown cardboard box and it says fragile and handle with care. Like a box that you might see when it's sent in the mail or received from a distributor, rather than a boxed lamp that you would get at a store. You know, you go to Target, you pick out a lamp. Boxed items from a store are often packaged in a more decorative fashion, and they're labeled, usually something more than a standard, plain brown paper box. And it's small enough to fit in a holiday gift bag with handles, so we're talking about the approximate size of a shoebox. The FBI noted that there were 3 types of tape located on the pieces of cardboard that they examined, and that there was a 4th kind, paper tape, brown, cardboard colored, the kind you used when you ship items in the mail, and that matched the box. They noted that that tape was, quote, organic to the cardboard box, which I take to mean that the paper tape was on the box originally when the lamplight was packaged inside it, rather than part of the bomb maker's preparations. Now let's talk about that bag. Detective Ronca's notes indicate that they had located that bag that the bomb was placed inside at Jacobson's, which was apparently next door to the White Marlin restaurant. Because the bag had been described as having a bow printed on it that disrupted the pattern, it was very likely their holiday bag, ones that they used when bagging items purchased by customers during Christmas. Jacobson's was a department store that sold clothing, fine jewelry, and home furnishings. Now, the store in question here was at the Longwood Village Shopping Center on State Road 434 in 1984, and it was a location that was about 8 miles from the Shop and Go store in Lockhart, where the bombing took place. It is very possible that the perpetrator frequented that area, worked in that area, and or lived in that area. Now, as I recall, Jacobson's was a bit posh for my family's means in 1984. We were more likely to shop at Sears or Kmart. I pulled up an advertisement for the store in 1985, and the ad copy pretty much encapsulates the type of store that it was. If you've always wanted to dress like the beautiful people, this is the year to do it. The look is money and glamour. Go ahead. Go for it. Romantic styles return with the new emphasis on femininity. Lace says it all. Jessica McClintock silk and lace dress, $200. From Papagallo, bare, body-hugging dresses with asymmetrical ruffles give a twist to the classical style. And luxurious dinner jackets in rich tapestry let men be as colorful as they like. Long, single shoulder gown, $660. Short, strapless cocktail dress, $620. Men's tapestry jacket, $110. Yeah, so Lockhart really wasn't a tapestry jacket kind of town, so it's interesting that the bomb would have been put in a Jacobson's bag. It conjures up all types of scenarios about how our mad bomber came to be in possession of it in the first place. Did he purchase a Christmas present for someone at that store? Maybe a family member bought something and left the bag laying around. It's certainly not the type of store that I expect someone who would build a bomb to frequent. And I definitely don't see a greasy-looking long-haired type perusing the men's jacket section or picking up a delightful little coffee table tchotchke. Now let's talk about the crime itself. What do we know about that? What can the crime tell us? It doesn't appear to have been directed at a single individual. Not from anything that I'm seeing. It seems as though the perpetrator had something to say, though, however sane or insane his rationale. Bombers usually do. There's a reason behind taking the time to build a device, picking a spot to place it, and then executing that task. Through my research, I have not uncovered a connection between any grievance and the device being placed there. Something directed at the store employees or the air machine owner, nothing. It doesn't appear that police were able to suss out anything like that either. Maybe we missed something. That's certainly a possibility. In fact, it's a probability. A case like this does not go unsolved for a lack of trying. Police worked on it for a few years. They ran down all sorts of leads, but nothing panned out. This is a small town and a very specific crime. The person who committed it had to have had a certain skill set. The explosive device took time to prepare, and a measure of deftness to place without being caught. Yet it was placed in an only moderately trafficked area in a tiny town. What did the perpetrator hope to achieve?
I remember, we never wrote the story, and I don't ever remember, we could never substantiate it, but there was always a rumor that the bomb was actually there because some guy had a fight with a woman who might have worked there, and he was mad at her, and that it was meant for her, and that Paul had accidentally happened upon it. Now, like I said, we could never get that confirmed, so we never ran it. But that was a rumor that was out there towards the end. But obviously, ATF never had anything, or anybody else ever had anything to substantiate that.
Interesting.
Well, I think we would have seen something.
Right.
Yeah.
Huh.
But that was the only move I'd ever heard that made any sense to me. But like I said, we couldn't substantiate it, so we never wrote anything about it.
Did you speak with the woman?
We didn't have a name. We didn't know.
Gotcha.
I mean,
Yeah.
and I'm assuming, she probably, if it was indeed true, and who knows, I was sure I would have hit the road, because those kind of jobs, you can
Right.
find another one of those jobs somewhere else pretty easily.
Yes. Yeah.
And if that were the case, I would have got the heck out of Dodge if I was her.
And when you were chasing down that possible lead as far as the employees, did you speak to a number of the employees about it?
Well, the time that came out, I mean, this was by the time I heard that, it was years after the fact. And so nobody even at that store would have, the turnover at those stores is pretty dramatic.
Right.
And I didn't even get the tip. It was another reporter, and I don't know how seriously he ran it down. He just mentioned, he said, "Hey, this is what they told me," but they never were able to pin it on anyone.
So I rolled that idea around in my head for a bit, and what I came up with is that if the bomb was meant for a specific clerk at the store, first, as Brett Holmes mentioned, the bomb itself really wasn't adequate to injure someone inside the store, unless they were hoping broken glass got to them. No, it was meant as a device to injure someone who was near it, and that's what all the nails put inside were about. If it was meant for a specific clerk, it would have been meant for, I assume, the clerk on duty that day. Her name was Judy. But the bomb maker would have to believe that Judy would have a reason to walk outside, go over to the air machine, and move the hose, because that's how he set the bomb up to detonate, right? With the monofilament line. And there is no situation in which the clerks would likely be doing that. As Kay mentioned, that wasn't even the store's machine. They had nothing to do with it. It was owned and maintained by someone else. So in the end, I'm not sure that tip makes much sense. So here's what we're left with. Not much. I can usually give you a pretty good assessment of possible suspects when I cover a case, but in this one, there don't appear to be any. Not even close. And that's a shame, because a little boy lost his leg in the middle of town on Christmas Day. It was his 11th birthday, a day that he already knew when he woke up that he wasn't going to be getting any presents. And that kid spent his day cobbling together empty bottles to take back to the store to get change for a soda and that goddamn air machine. And what he was left with was one less leg and a lot of painful memories. Imagine that. His entire life changed in that moment, and he still has no idea why. I do believe someone knows who committed this crime. Lockhart is too small a town for someone not to know. I guess it could have been someone random passing through or who lived elsewhere, but not much about that makes any sense. It seems to me the type of person who commits an act like this would want other people to know. Perhaps he was not expecting a child to get hurt, and when that happened, he was so ashamed, he never spoke of it. He just scurried into the shadows and hid. Because who are you going to share that kind of thing with, right? You tell anyone you did something that ended up hurting a kid and everybody knows you're a piece of shit. Maybe he left town, couldn't stand to see the spot where it happened. Or maybe he didn't. Maybe he still lives around there and he thinks about it every time he drives past that store. I hope he does. Everyone that lived around there back then would have known that air pump got a lot of use, and much of that by kids. Lots of them rode their bikes to school next door. It's equally possible that the bomber didn't care who got injured, because it was never about that. It was always about him and his grievance, his anger, him and what he believed the world owed him. Maybe one day we'll learn the truth. Maybe one day someone will speak up. That kid grew into a man, and I'm guessing he'd like to know why he lost a leg. I don't believe this case will ever be adjudicated because the statute of limitations has run out. Justice will not be served for Paul Jewell. But maybe one day he'll get some answers. I think that's the best that he can hope for. And if that doesn't piss you off, you're a better person than me. If you are a family member, friend, or member of law enforcement that is interested in having your case covered on the Down and Away podcast, you can contact me at deckerjenny@gmail.com. That's DECKERJENI@gmail.com. If you are interested in fiction, you should check out the Morneau podcast from my Detective Dex Morneau crime series. Both Down and Away and the Morneau podcast can be found wherever you listen to podcasts.